It was a 3-hour fracas in Caracas, and given the shock and awe of the operation, it is easy to keep a laser focus on Venezuela. But we are a world at war, and we now need to think more about how Maduro's arrest affects the broader web of alliances and antagonists, because it is a super captivating topic. So today, I'm going to do this in 3 phases. First, I will speak about the global oil trade, because the consequences there are a bit more straightforward. Second, near-term regime change elsewhere will be our focus. After all, I write this on the 3rd day of 2026, meaning that the United States is currently on pace to remove roughly 60% of world leaders by the end of the year. Finally, we will look at the broader Second Cold War picture, and what the military fallout of Maduro's capture is for the World War III picture. Bear in mind that we are in a fast-developing situation, so even minor changes in Venezuela could drastically alter what I am discussing here. I am also going to spare you most of the concerns about how the United States may eventually find itself with deeper problems in Venezuela. I covered that yesterday, and do not want to rehash those points. Instead, I will only highlight specific concerns when they arise. But let's start with the oil situation. Even within this category, we can subdivide things into a clear consequence and a fate that remains to be seen. No matter what becomes of the Venezuelan government, it is safe to say that Shadow Fleet tankers will not be visiting Venezuelan ports anytime soon. Yes, the Shadow Fleet extends beyond Russia. It is a global service that supports any country under Western sanctions. Regarding Venezuela now, either a US-friendly government enters office, at which point the Shadow Fleet will not be coming back, period, or Maduro-era remnants try to hold on to power, and the US Navy, plus the domestic instability inside of Venezuela, deters the Shadow Fleet from trying to fill their fuel tanks. No matter which way Venezuela falls here, that means there will soon be a surplus of Shadow Fleet tankers looking for work, lest there be more of these capture operations. And you know who could use more Shadow Fleet tankers? Yep, Vladimir Putin. That is especially true when Russia's refineries are in terrible shape, and Russia appears to be needing to export more crude in the absence of being able to refine the stuff for itself. In turn, that puts the onus on Ukraine to do one of 2 things. The first option is to begin heavily targeting oil terminals to prevent the tankers from loading, which is something that Ukraine has already started to do. The second option is to heavily target the tankers themselves, which, again, is something that Ukraine has already started to do. There is an important point here about the bigger strategic picture that has gotten lost in the shuffle. The New York Times had an article last week with insider accounts of the bizarre year of diplomacy that we all just lived through. Well, one new revelation from it is that the United States has been sharing intelligence with Ukraine to target the tankers. We previously knew that the United States was helping with the land-based campaign, but the CIA has gone further and extended the help to the seas. Well, now the CIA is going to have a bunch of vessels to keep track of, as they are departing Venezuela and heading elsewhere. Short run, this will also mean that less oil will be on the international market, and specifically the gray market. Venezuela typically contributes 800 to 900,000 barrels of it daily. However, the gray market prices follow the market as a whole, and vice versa, just with the gray oil being sold at a discount. That is a complicated way of saying that oil prices are about to go up, though some of this is already baked into the prices because of the US naval presence. But whatever the price increase is, it is good news for Putin, assuming that Ukraine cannot counteract the benefit by attacking the infrastructure. A couple of caveats there. 1. When I say good for Putin, I am only referring to that strict part of the oil economics. The broader economic overview is less rosy for Russia, because Venezuela previously had needed to import various resources from Russia to make its oil industry functional. This was one of the few sources of foreign currency that Russia still had, and it is now gone. Moreover, whether Maduro's fall is good for Russia at the overall strategic level is a separate question that we will get to later. 2. The extent to which this will benefit Putin is questionable. We already went through this once with a crisis involving Iran, and the oil market seemed not to care at the time. It is a brave new fracking world that we live in. I, for one, will be keeping a close eye on the oil markets for the next few days. Also, although I have been framing this in the context of Russia, because that is the conflict that has the most public interest, Iran gets the same sort of benefit here because it also exports on the gray market. China, in contrast, does not like any of this because it wants to import oil. It is the fun of a coalition that is not united for a cause, but rather is united against a cause. Meanwhile, the long-run oil consequences are about as clear as a barrel of thick muck known as Venezuelan crude. Is this more of a case like Iraq, where the place is a mess for a long time? Or are we looking at Panama, which had a relatively clean end? Well, if there is continued instability in Venezuela, then what I just said applies beyond the short run. Higher prices, good for Russia. If the instability wraps up quickly, then there is going to be an open question about what happens with the oil revenues coming out of Venezuela. Trump's press conference following the operation provided an interesting perspective on that, and also raised some questions about what is practically enforceable. However, the funds are divided, though. The point is that substantially more oil will be on the market. As I just alluded to, Venezuela produces the gunkiest of oil, and thus needs both investment in its oil fields and U.S. refineries to turn that gunk into something useful. So more oil on the market, lower prices, bad for Putin. The second topic that I wanted to work through is what will happen next regarding regime change elsewhere, because goodness, this has been the subject of some seriously bad takes. The basic idea is that now that Trump has gone after Maduro, the proverbial cat is out of the bag. The precedent is there. No leader is safe, regardless of which side they are on. This is a talking point, and it is a good one because it indeed gets people talking. And I can personally remember when I was young and had that exact concern about Iraq, which, as we all know now, was not the most serious concern there. But along those lines, the precedent argument is mainly effective at activating people who you might call casual international relations consumers. Because when you have been in this business for long enough, you become immune to its logic. Let's just think about this for a moment. For the precedent thing to matter, there has to be someone in the Kremlin who woke up this morning and said, "Gee, the only reason we have not tried to kill Zelensky yet is because the United States has shown restraint with Maduro. But after yesterday, we can finally do what we have always wanted to do all along." Or there has to be someone in Beijing who woke up this morning and said, "Gee, the only reason we have not tried to kill William Lai, despite his very tasteful name, is because the United States has shown restraint with Maduro. But after yesterday, we can finally do what we have always wanted to do all along." Ask yourself for a moment, in what world are these countries actually thinking that? Not making public complaints about the move, but actually thinking about tit-for-tat reasoning in that exact way. On the target side, I can guarantee you that Zelensky is not thinking twice about this. Russia has been trying to assassinate him since literally day one. But Russia is just not good enough to succeed, which is how you get iconic videos of Zelensky on the streets of Kyiv basically singing, "Na na 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 na." Likewise, the still tastefully named William Lai is not waking up this morning, shaking in his boots, thinking to himself, "Shoot, the only reason I was still president was because the United States had not yet arrested Maduro. I guess, like Putin, I am done." What matters here is what has always mattered in international relations. Do you have the power to do something? And do you have the resolve to bear the costs associated with it? Basically, generalize the idea of lines. And the fact of the matter is that doing these things is really, really hard. Russia could not do it despite sharing a border with Ukraine. Good luck to China trying to do it across the Taiwan Strait. Americans, count your blessings that you have a fleet of aircraft carriers that puts the rest of the world to shame. That is why the United States has done this before in Panama, and it did not result in a bunch of other countries toppling other leaders. That is why the United States has done this before in Iraq, and it did not result in a bunch of other countries toppling other leaders. If you do not want to be toppled, be more like Ukraine and successfully defend Hostomel Airport from invaders. Be more like Taiwan and sign $11 billion arms deals with the United States. Be more like Taiwan and make Chinese importers so reliant on your microchips that they dare not risk their supply. None of that is a guarantee of your safety, of course, but each is a step in the right direction. The extent to which this matters for future regime change is the United States' willingness to do this again elsewhere. At the press conference afterward, the Trump administration wanted to make this a clear implication of the arrest. They were even trying to coin the term Donroe Doctrine. It was present on paper with the 2025 National Security Strategy released late last year, and now it is present in practice. The leaders actually spending the morning rethinking foreign policy are likely those in the rest of Latin America. Finally, we get to various implications about the Second Cold War coalitions. As a starting point, I saw an abundance of social media comments suggesting that somehow this is proof that the United States has shifted coalitions. Part of me wonders if there are ongoing influence operations that basically take any headline about the United States and then make incoherent arguments that the United States has a secret alliance with Russia, all with the goal of reducing European trust in the United States, and indeed Americans' trust in their own institutions. I get that nuance is already lost in 2026, just as it was lost in 2025 and many years before that. But there is a difference between the Trump administration being bad at diplomacy and literally everything Trump does being commanded straight from the Kremlin. There is also a difference between 1. It being wise for Europe to develop its own strategic autonomy in a world where the Pentagon is more focused on the Indo-Pacific, and 2. Europe removing any sort of coordination with the United States in the event of a globalized war. Remember, it is much easier for Russia and China to win if they get to fight together, while the United States and Europe fight separately. Back to the main topic. Venezuela was the counter-coalition's contributor from the Western Hemisphere. Consequently, the countries that have objected to the operation are Russia, China, and Iran. North Korea was too busy testing ballistic missiles to comment on it. I hate using chess analogies in international relations, but the reason they are angry is straightforward. The counter-coalition lost one of its knights, and you usually are not happy when one of your pieces disappears. It does not help that the counter-coalition looked powerless to stop the United States as Maduro was getting arrested. Moreover, if you erase Venezuela from the web, imagine what that does in the event of a true World War III. It cannot cut off oil to try to manipulate global prices. It cannot order vessels, civilian or otherwise, to go to the Panama Canal and scuttle themselves near the entrances or inside. And it cannot be used as a base to fire Shahed drones or worse at Florida or Gulf Coast oil production. In the medium run, it also means that the United States can rearrange its naval assets to other theaters. Indeed, the fleet had pulled ships from both the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East. If the Venezuelan crisis ends cleanly, and that is a big if, then they can project U.S. power elsewhere. The flip side, of course, is that if things turn south, it will draw further resources to the Caribbean. Think about how much Iraq and Afghanistan upset the Indo-Pacific pivot people, and you get the idea. Aside from U.S. resources, the war demonstrated a couple of other things about the counter-coalition's capabilities. 1. China's intelligence agencies did not see this coming. Trump approved the mission on Christmas, and the U.S. military was waiting around for the right weather and other circumstances for the operation to work. Despite that, China had officials meet with Maduro a day before the operation. Compare that to the start of the Ukraine invasion, when the Biden administration was screaming for a month, "Hey guys, it's happening!" As for the operation itself, Venezuela had Russian air defenses, some of which were part of a recent bizarre delivery. The United States cut through them as though they did not exist. It is informative of how a battle between NATO and Russia might go, where the hope is that Russian air defenses would evaporate in the first hour of the battle, then all of Russia's logistics would evaporate, and then ground forces would quickly mop up whatever remains of Russian frontline troops. The success in Venezuela is a weak indicator that such thinking is correct, though successful sustained combined arms operations in Europe might eventually have to contend with anti-aircraft drones, hence why this is a weak indicator. As for Europe, you might have noticed a few complaints coming from across the Atlantic, but note that they focus on legal concerns, not strategic concerns. Here is Kaja Kallas, the head of EU foreign policy. The EU has repeatedly stated that Mr. Maduro lacks legitimacy and has defended a peaceful transition. Under all circumstances, the principles of international law and the UN Charter must be respected. We call for restraint. The Polish foreign minister, Radoslaw Sikorski, was more blunt. It couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Donald Tusk instead went after Russia's lack of self-awareness on the topic. Anyway, the point is that if Europe really thought that the operation was somehow the end of transatlantic cooperation, they would be complaining about the outcome, not wanting to debate the finer points of international law. As I said at the top, there is still a lot to play out here, and everything in Venezuela could eventually turn south. But Maduro's removal is not a good start for the counter-coalition. Meanwhile, if you want to learn more about the broader US-Venezuela crisis, I have a whole playlist on the subject. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you next time. Take care.